We'll just get started in another couple seconds. We'll just give everybody a chance to get organized. Okay, we'll get started. It's 4:02. Before we start the 10th meeting of the Planning Environment Committee, I want to say that City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. And I will call the 10th meeting of the Planning Environment Committee to order by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. And with that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of conflict. I'm not seeing any. So I'll go to the consent items. We have about 7 of those, and I'll look to see if anyone would like to pull any of these items. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, Madam Chair, 2.3.
Is 2.4 the one? Okay, we've got 2.3 pulled. Any others? And I'm going to pull item 2.4. So with that, can I have a motion to put the remaining consent items on the floor? So that would be all items except for 2.3 and 2.4. Moved by Councillor Hopkins. Do I have a second? Moved by, or seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any comments or questions on those consent items? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through the chair. My question is about item 2.2. I know this report is for information and then to be circulated for comment. And I wonder if through you, planning staff could discuss sort of how that circulation and comment is going to work, given the somewhat different opportunities for public participation that we have right now, given what's going on with the pandemic, in terms of the timeline and perhaps some of the methods of outreach that would be undertaken by staff.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Barrett, I suppose.
Sure. You, Madam Chair. We're looking at, well, first off, we've got a fairly extensive list of participants through this process, so we'll be going back to that list. This is not the first time that this issue has been back in front of council. And so we will be going back and mining that extensive list that we had to the previous, I think, 2 times that this has been in front, and making sure that we get it out to those folks. That's a great question. I think we're going to have to try to do some means of catching folks' attention to draw them to the web page where all the information will be, but how we get folks there. We will be doing a regular, as I said, circulation to not only those who normally get this, but our bigger list. We'll probably work with communications as a way to have the get engaged landing a little bit more engaging so that we can make sure that we can draw folks in on it. But I think given the amount of consultation that's been done on this in the past and the size of the contact list that we've got from this file already, that will probably touch most of the individuals and the organizations and the community associations who have been interested in this project. And certainly, I'm putting this offer out to any information or any contacts that the members of council and committee would have that would also help us to make sure that we get this out, because this is something that has always been of great interest to a lot of residents in London.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I certainly will take Mr. Barrett up on his offer. There have been a couple of new groups that have formed since we last dealt with this issue. I'm thinking, for example, of the London Tenants Association, who would likely be interested and may not have been involved directly in the previous discussion. So I'll pass that information on to Mr. Barrett. And I have had the opportunity to participate in some construction-related Zoom meetings, which I will say, you know, the pandemic has made a lot of things very difficult, but it has made some other things easier. And I think taking advantage of the ability to reach out to people on this kind of platform to have them participate without having to do travel, without having to necessarily go to a website where they can talk to a live person and raise the issues they're interested in. Hopefully we can take advantage of some of those things. I imagine our staff are already considering those means of engaging with folks. It's obviously can't replace everything. It shouldn't be the only way we do things, but hopefully we can have some discussions like that that would allow more people to participate, perhaps in an easier way than would have otherwise been the case. I appreciate the report, and I look forward to a future discussion of 962_2, which we have debated before.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the consent items accepting 2.3 and 2.4? That's what's on the floor. I'm not seeing any. I do have a question on item 2.7, which is the building division monthly report. Obviously, as expected, we're seeing quite a change in those numbers there. And I'm wondering if staff can let me know if we're seeing that there's a big backlog, like will we be expecting many of the applications or activity that might have happened during the slowdown because of COVID, if we're expecting to see a resurgence in this area?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, the numbers speak for themselves, obviously. What you see in the report is the number of building permits, excuse me, and or activity related to permits that were already issued. What you don't see there is the number of applications that we have currently in the hopper. So just to put it into context, we have about 5 or 6 apartment buildings that we are ready to issue, totaling 920 units. So to answer your question on backlog, we are starting to see some permits being issued 1 and 2 days late. We are trying to mitigate that internally. And we are working closely with industry, with the London Home Builders and the London Development Institute excuse me, on mitigating any issues that may arise from that. But in general context, seeing where we are at, 1 or 2 or even 3 days late to have a permit issued, I wouldn't consider that a huge problem at this point in time. But we are definitely also looking into where this is taking us in the short-term future in terms of demand, not only for issuing building permits but for inspections as well. So we're on it basically.
Thank you, Mr. Kokoros. Any other comments or questions on the consent items? No? Okay, I have a mover and a seconder, so I will call the vote, starting with Councillor Hopkins,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer,
Yes.
Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That takes us to item 2.3, the Conservation Master Plan for Meadow Lily Woods Environmentally Significant Area, and Councillor Hopkins, you pulled that one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is on the Conservation Master Plan for Meadow Lily Woods and Environmental Significant Area. I understand we're receiving and thanking the community as well as EPAC for their work on this, but we're also just noting that we will be initiating an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. And I'm wondering through you, Madam Chair, to staff, if they, given that we have heard, or I've heard some concerns about when this is going to happen and timelines, and just would like staff to respond as to when we can expect this.
Okay,
Through you, Madam Chair, we're actually hoping to get this back with the official plan amendment on the mounded boundary and the zoning bylaw amendment in October of this year.
Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you for that. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity that I heard October, but how can we get this on the work plan? I know it would be something that the community is interested, and was wondering, it's supposed to just being noted, if we could, do we need a motion, or can this official plan amendment and zoning bylaw for the Meadow Lily Woods ESA be put on the work plan?
To Madam Chair, it's on our work plan so that we can get it to you for October, so that we hope to have it to you by then.
So we will see it on the work plan come October.
No, you'll actually see the amendment in front of you by October. That's when we have to have the amendment back. So it's on our work plan now, so that you will see it in October with the amendment in front of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett, for that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on item 2.4, or sorry, 2.3? Oh, can I get a mover then and a second? Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Thank you, and I'll call the vote. Oh, Deputy Mayor, do you have a question also or a comment?
I just wanted to recommend to any of the members of the public who have not already dug into the Conservation Master Plan itself. It's quite a good document with a lot of information in it. So I know a number of members of the public are very interested in this particular ESA. I'm sure that they're combing over the master plan in great detail. I do appreciate the link to the document rather than including the whole thing in the planning committee report, as it would have, I think, tripled the size or doubled the size of the report itself. Thank you very much to the staff and the consultants who worked on the CMP.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments? So it's been moved and seconded, and I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer,
Yay.
Councillor Hopkins,
Yes.
Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. So I pulled item 2.44, which is the environmental studies, private land and eastern meadowlark habitat. It's something that this committee had asked, and EPAC also had asked staff to bring to us. I also pulled it because the report should have been presented to us today by Sean Hudson, an ecologist with the city, and it would have been his first report with us. And sad to say that Mr. Hudson passed away in a tragic kayaking accident just last month. So I wanted to bring that to the committee's attention, and Mr. Barrett is going to speak to us about this report.
Thank you, Councillor. And again, I wanted to, I asked that this be pulled so that we could actually acknowledge Sean. As the councillor noted, Sean was an ecologist. He started working with us in October of last year. And this was Sean's first job since his graduation with a Master of Science from Trent University earlier in 2019. And as Councillor Cassidy noted, Sean passed away as a result of a tragic kayaking accident in June. He actually had this report done for us to be on the March 30th PEC agenda, and he would have been able to speak to it then, but the report was pulled as we were limiting the agenda matters for you in consideration of the early outbreak of the COVID epidemic. Just a little bit about Sean. He had a laugh and a smile that lit up the room, and in his short time with us, he established himself as a key member of our team. He was enthusiastic, passionate, and dedicated to his work and the environment, and he was willing to share his knowledge with his colleagues and the public. He worked on the Midway Valley ESA Trails project. He was our coyote sighting contact and go-to person, and he was very much involved in the Environmental Management Guideline Update project. John received the Governor General's Gold Medal Award from Trent for high academic standing, and he had just been accepted and had intended to start his PhD in Carleton, at Carleton this September. He will be greatly missed by all of us in planning. And if you have any questions on the report, Emily or I would be happy to take them. Thanks.
So thank you, Mr. Barrett. Before we go to questions, I wonder if we could just take a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. And you did a wonderful job, Mr. Barrett, bringing Sean to the committee and making him very real for us. So thank you for that. Are there any questions or comments about the report? I wonder, Mr. Barrett, I know everyone has probably read it, but it was something that the committee was very much interested in. I remember when this came, and it concerns the ability to do environmental impact studies when part of the area is private land and we don't have permission to go on that private land. So Mr. Barrett explained it very well to me offline, and I think it's something worth having a little bit of an explanation. Do you want to go ahead, Mr. Barrett?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, there were two parts on this ask. The first part was about our ability to access private lands when we're looking at environmental studies. And the second part was on the meadowlark habitat. So I'll start with the access to private lands. This really, and it arose when we're at the level of, and I think this is really important, at the level of the subject land status report, or when we're doing community plans or area plans. And at that level, we're looking to confirm the natural heritage system, the presence of the natural heritage system. And a large part of that is identifying what's there, but also making some preliminary calls onto the significance of these features. And while it certainly cannot be argued that the greatest amount of access possible to the greatest number of properties will give us the best and most complete information, I think it's really important for the community to understand that, in fact, for determining significance, which is very often what we do at the subject land status report or the area plan level, there are actually many criteria for almost all of our actually natural heritage features that can be used at the landscape level to determine significance. So what that really means is that while it would be great to know if there is a specific location where a rare or an endangered species might be, and that is certainly a determinant of significance, we can also use landscape level data. So the size, the composition, the vegetation composition, the presence of hydrologic features, those kinds of things, in fact, can be used at the subject land status report and the area plan level to determine significance. So while we might not always get access, access is not always required in order to determine significance. And I think the way I put it to the councillor is, if we've determined a feature to be significant and we weren't able to determine whether or not there was something else there, it doesn't make it more significant. Your test is whether or not the feature is significant. So while it's great to have all that other information, it's not always required. The other part of Don's report, though, that dealt with access was talking about how it is that we do it and protocols that we could put in place to try probably do it a little bit better. We do a lot of extensive landowner contact before projects start, where we seek to have access. And one of the things that's suggested in this is that we not just stop after that first letter, but we try again. And that's certainly something that we'll begin to institute. The other thing that we've done, which has been successful, and it's been for projects that the city has done, an example would be when we did the woodland study and did the vegetation patches, and I believe that there were over 100 vegetation patches that were examined, where we looked for landowner access on all of those. One of the ways where we secured more access was we actually offered to share up all of the information that was found on an individual property. So the sharing of information, the sharing of data often goes a long way to encourage people to provide access. And then I guess the last thing is to just go back to my first point, which is, while access isn't always secured, we do secure it in a great number of instances. We always secure it for the lands that are under consideration. So if there's an application in front of you, we would have been on those lands where there is the application, but for abutting lands, we might not get there. But there's very often enough information whereby we are able to say, because we didn't get there and there may be this, then we can make recommendations as to what may be required, or we can say what needs to be done on future studies. As it related to the meadowlark, there's just a review as to what the provincial requirements are, and then some notations about what the city has done, some commentary from some of the consultants that have worked with us, but also some examples of some of the projects that we've done on habitat restoration. And in fact, many instances, the city goes beyond what is recommended by the province. So those were really the two main points of the report. But the big piece, I think, was on the access, and certainly the greater amount of access, the better, but the access is not always required to determine significance.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And I have Councillor Turner, and after that, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you, Mr. Barrett, for your words about Mr. Hudson. He certainly sounds like somebody I would have really enjoyed hearing from at our committee, and would have had a lot to contribute to our work. And this report I found interesting, and your explanation there, Mr. Barrett, was quite helpful too. I had two questions with respect to the identifying of significant features. One, where you talked about abutting properties where there might be a significant feature. Is that sufficient enough to deem the features on the property where we may not get access significant? So could we apply that zoning or those overlays where there was sufficient evidence even without owner permission, and then would that create a reverse onus on the property owner to prove that they did not have a significant feature on their property? So that's the first question. I'll pose a second one.
Certainly. Well, again, I think that the short answer is yes, you can still determine the significance without getting there, particularly when we're dealing with it as a landscape feature. And in the report, there's reference that's made to the Natural Heritage Reference Manual and provincial standards, data collection standards, as they relate to how you do these determinations. So, for example, environmentally significant areas, there are landscape level criteria that can be used. Woodlands and significant woodlands, they are landscape level criteria that can be used to determine significance. So sort of, I'll call them our biggies, and have significance determined at the landscape level, and that landscape level can rely on aerial photo and aerial photo interpretation. As the councillor knows, and many others do, we've got extensive databases of vegetation and the vegetation patches that exist, and the composition of those veg patches, plus their size and tied on with other features that can again be determined at a landscape level, can all be used as determinants of significance. So it is a recognized level, and the Natural Heritage Reference Manual and data collection standards that are noted in Sean's report speak to this as being appropriate for being able to determine significance.
Yeah, so that's helpful. And if there was, through you, Madam Chair, if there was an application on the part of the owner to do something different with the property, the onus would be on them to provide the ecological studies to support that, to say whether it was delineated properly or not. Is that correct?
Certainly, any future application, and certainly an application that would be made on those lands, there's no way that we would be doing when there's an application actually made on the lands where there would be determinations made on the features that existed on those lands without having access to the land.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, a final question was just with respect to the best practices for securing property access as identified. Mr. Barrett, you'd said that those would be things that you'd start to consider and start to do. Are these ones that you'll start to incorporate in general practice when evaluating these reports and these areas?
Certainly, to you, Madam Chair, a lot of these we already do. It's sort of those on top of. So we, those standard things, securing the access, having the permission forms, and those kinds of things. Those are our standard operating procedures now. It's going that next step. So rather than just doing it in the single send out, what's recommended is we start to do a little bit more follow up and try to be a little bit more rigorous on some of that follow up and go back maybe 1, 2, 3 times. And also, as I said, see what it is that we might be able to offer up, like data sharing and those kinds of things that would hopefully increase the amount of access that we would have.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Barrett. First of all, for your tribute to Mr. Hudson, it was very, very touching, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. I do want to, Councillor Turner sort of asked a number of good questions about where we're going in the future, and I just want to be specific more to the ability to access lands, and really appreciate your comments about the need to keep on trying. I think that's something that I'm hearing, that our best practices we can sort of change a little bit. I know there's other opportunities that we can use to assess the properties, but to keep on trying and incur. I think there's a sense now with a changing climate and stewardship that I would hope would be greater abilities for access, and that knowledge and information sharing. All those things are really important. Just want to thank you very much for the report and for allowing me to make these comments.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this report? Okay, so the staff recommendation is that Civic Administration be requested to review and report back at a future Planning Committee meeting on best practices and legal limitations for performing subject land status reports and environmental impact studies on lands that are under private ownership and that are owned by multiple parties, and in particular where one or more of the property owners refuse staff entry onto the lands. B, the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee be requested to perform an environmental scan of practices in other municipalities related to the above noted evaluations. And C, the Civic Administration be requested to review the plan for meadowlark habitat on a comprehensive ecological systems basis so that secondary plans and planning applications can address habitat requirements in accordance with this larger context. That's the recommendation. Do I have a mover? Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I have the clerk wanting to tell me something.
Yeah.
Sorry, deja vu, if anybody, I see Deputy Mayor and Councillor Hopkins. Yeah, so this is just, there we go.
Yeah.
Recommendation to receive this report, and it's moved by the same people. Any comments on receiving? No. So I'll call the question. And happy Monday, yes. Councillor Hopkins.
Happy Monday, yes.
Mayor Holder. He said yes. You're muted.
I'll say yes twice.
Good. Councillor Kayabaga. You're muted too.
Yes.
Good. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I vote yes. And sorry, I went in a different order because your pictures have all moved.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay. That takes us to the scheduled items, and the other clerk is telling me something, the deputy clerk. We have two hands in the air. Mr. Barrett, did you need to speak, and or Councillor Turner?
Sorry, no, I meant to put my hand down. You caught it. It was the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I got everybody trying to save me from myself. So now we are on the scheduled items. And 3.1 is our first public participation meeting of the evening. It is the application for 442 3rd Street, and I need a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. And I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga. Didn't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So, as is our normal practice, I will go to staff for a brief introduction. Do we have members of the public in one of the committee rooms for this item? Yes?
We have members of the public in committee room 1 and 2.
Thank you. So I will go to staff for a brief presentation on this bill then. I mean, this report application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The subject site is located at 442 3rd Street on the east side of 3rd Street between Dundas Street and Oxford Street East. The site is currently developed with a 2-story single-attached dwelling. The site is surrounded by a city-owned park to the east, single-attached dwellings to the north and south, and a commercial plaza to the west. The recommended amendment is consistent with 2020 PPS. It's in conformity with the London plan, and it's in conformity with the 1989 official plan. The recommended amendment also facilitates the development of an underutilized site with an appropriate form of development. I just want to bring to committee's attention that there was an amendment to the bylaw and the regulations, number 2 for the north interior side yard setback. It did say habitable space on the bottom of that. That's been amended just to show the 3 meters and not habitable space. On the north side, there's an existing driveway to the north. And with that buffer, there's a 3-meter buffer to the north and plus a 3-meter setback with the building. There'll be a 6-meter buffer between the two properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxula. Are there any technical questions for the planner for that? I'm not seeing any. Is the applicant present? And would the applicant care to speak?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Paul Hind, Tanfield Consulting. I'm representing the applicant, Forever Homes. We are in support and agreement with the staff report that was prepared. We thank staff for their diligence in preparing this in these trying times, and barring no other comments or questions that may be raised from the public, I'd like to thank staff, and we support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hind. Are there any members of the public in the committee room that would like to speak about this matter, ask questions? Come to the microphone, state your name, and you have a maximum of 5 minutes.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Shoemaker. I'm resident to the south of 442. I'm at 436. And my biggest concern is that there's going to be a lot more pedestrian traffic, a lot more infrastructure as far as waste and like washrooms and stuff like that to the city's infrastructure, and a lot of hard surfaces that are going to be running water off onto my property. There's also a strip of land in there that, according to my lot survey, is that been surveyed into 442 that should not have been surveyed into 442 because I've been maintaining it for over 30 years. So I was wondering how they have room to do the buildings that they're looking at doing, because they say in their report that I found online that it's not going to be student housing, and then later on it is student housing. I mean, there's 2 common areas, a kitchen and a living room. And then in the front building they're looking at putting up, there's a total of 10 units with 10 washrooms. So there's a lot of extra stuff going on there that doesn't seem to make sense to me. And it's nowhere close to looking like any of the buildings in the neighborhood. The building right now is currently 1.5 stories, and they're looking at putting a 2-story up, which is going to look right down to my backyard. And they want to put just straight hedges up, which is not very much privacy. And if they get all this extra land, I lose all my access to my backyard. And that's, I guess, where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. And I heard a couple of questions in there. Once we finish with the public participation portion, we'll go to staff to see if there are, if they can address some of your questions or concerns. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to this? I'm not seeing any. There's
I don't have any more people in committee room 1 and 2 for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Bunn. Now I need a motion to close, I need a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Kayabagha, seconded by Councillor Turner. And I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabagha.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes. So Mr. Shoemaker had a couple of questions, so perhaps staff can address these. He was wondering about the survey of the land. Also, he was wondering about whether it would be student housing or not. I know I have a response to that, but if staff cares to address that. And also the complaint that the proposed building doesn't match what other houses and buildings look like in the area. And also there were concerns about privacy. So I wonder if staff could address those concerns.
Good evening, Madam Chair. This is Michael Tomazinczyk here. I think those are some valid concerns raised by the neighbor, and many of those are related to the site plan approval process. So matters such as servicing will be addressed through the site plan approval process. Certainly, if there's no capacity on the site, then site plan approval won't be granted for the development of the property. Also, through the site plan approval process, survey will be required to ensure that the property borders or the proposed development is contained within the property's borders. With regard to privacy, certainly through the site plan approval process, there could be some additional landscaping proposed to offset some of that. And if you, I'll just turn the committee's attention to page 108 of the agenda, and I'll give everyone a chance to get there. And what 108 shows is the conceptual site plan. And what you're seeing here is a 4-unit building immediately to the rear of the site. So that's at the bottom of the page. And a 2-unit semi-detached dwelling right along 3rd Street. And then there'll be a driveway intervening between the southerly property and that 2-unit semi-detached, just to provide a little bit more buffering to the neighboring property to the south. And as for the student population potentially renting this property, the zoning bylaw is just not capable of regulating who the tenants are. We zone for the use, and then it can be occupied by seniors, students, families, you name it. It's not, the zoning bylaw doesn't have the ability to regulate the tenancy.
Sorry, I didn't let the clerk announce the result of our last vote where we closed the public participation meeting, so I'll let the clerk do that now.
The public participation meeting vote closed 6-0.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Shoemaker understood what Mr. Tomazinski said, that a lot of these concerns and issues will come at the site plan process where they actually deal with the details of how the building will be constructed on the site. So what we're doing here is responding to an application request for a rezoning of the property, which is the use of the land, how it's going to be used. And what we determine here at Planning Committee is whether or not what's being proposed as this multifamily residential sort of development, is that appropriate on this site? So that's what we're judging here today. And those other issues that you've brought up, which are valid concerns, as Mr. Tomazinski said, will be dealt with in detail during the site planning phase, which comes later down the road if the application is approved. So I will go to committee now if there are questions or comments or concerns about this application. Or members that aren't on the committee who are visiting, also welcome. I'll go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
No, I was just going to support going to Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually was just waving to say thank you for acknowledging that there are some non-members here. I don't have any particular questions on this application. I actually think that, you know, it's consistent with our desire to infill. While I understand the residents' concerns, those are best dealt with by site plan. So when this comes to council, I'll certainly be supportive of it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Do I have a mover for the staff recommendation? Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. So I will call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
I was just going to make a comment too, Madam Chair, if I may, before I vote. I just
Go.
want to say...
Go ahead.
But I would like to bring to the attention to the neighbor that there are a number of considerations on this recommendation as it goes through the site plan. They're noted, and I would encourage the neighbor to still be involved with that site plan process and find out and see how some of the concerns are going to be dealt with. So again, I'm happy to second this recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
Yes.
No other comments or questions. And again, as the councillor said to Mr. Shoemaker, if you see on the front page of this report from staff, item B talks about some of those site plan matters that were identified during the review. So those will definitely be addressed as this moves through the process. And then you having raised some of these other matters about servicing and the survey, privacy, those sorts of things, those are now on the radar of staff if they hadn't already been in this report, and some of them are. So staff are aware, and they will make sure that they address those concerns as well during the site plan phase. And with that, and I'm not seeing any other hands up, I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaka.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you to Mr. Shoemaker for coming and for participating in this process with us. With that, I will move to item 3.2, another public participation meeting for a demolition request for heritage listed properties at 74 and 78 Wellington Road. And I need a motion to open the PPM. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaka.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'll go to staff first, if you want to give us a brief little introduction on this. Mr. Maitland? Sorry, Mr. Gagnon.
Thank you and good afternoon. Through the chair, both of the properties at 74 Wellington Road and 78 Wellington Road were identified as potential cultural heritage resources as part of the Rapid Transit project. They were added to the Register of Cultural Heritage Resources by resolution of Municipal Council. These properties were subsequently evaluated using the criteria of Ontario Regulation 906 and were found to not meet the criteria for designation. The recommendation this afternoon is to remove these properties from the Register of Cultural Heritage Resources and allow the demolitions to proceed. Salvage is always encouraged, but it is not possible to attach terms and conditions to the removal of a heritage listed property from the register. The Latch was consulted at its meeting on March 11th, 2020, and supported the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Are there any members of the public who are here for this item?
I have a member in committee room 1 and 2.
Thank you, Ms. Bunn. If you would like to come to the microphone and state your name, you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Good afternoon. My name's Arlene Jones. I'm here with Andy Jones. We live at 88 Wellington Road. The one house that's beside the 2 houses that are proposed to be demolished. So we're the 3rd house from Watson Street. Demolishing these 2 houses would make us exposed completely. We're at Wellington Road, Watson Road, we'd be completely exposed. We already have regular and frequent visits from people in the neighborhood, in our property, in our backyard. We've been broken into last June, which almost completely destroyed us mentally. That Watson Street goes into the park, and there's a lot of people, and unsavory types. And I'm not talking about homeless people, but I'm talking about people that are doing break and enters. Since this pandemic, we've seen a lot on Wellington Road. It would also expose the people, the older couple that are on Watson Street, so they wouldn't have a side fence anymore, as well as us not having a side fence. We've been watching the property closely. We've been in contact with Garda, who's been hired by the City of London to protect those 2 properties. And we've asked the city to put motion lights, and we had an agreement with I think that he's the city manager of owned properties. He had the lights up for a short period of time, and without notice, he came and undid the hydro and took out the meters. exposing it now to Wellington Road as vacant. We are constantly having to ask for the lawn to be cut, but we're on it. But I'm here to represent ourselves and the older people on Watson that would not have, these fences would be gone and we would be wide open for anybody coming down Watson or Wellington Road, which they do at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in our backyards. We're really concerned about it. And somebody had just mentioned something about a meeting at March 11th. We were to attend a meeting, I believe, in March 11th that was canceled. So I don't know about another meeting that went on. We were told that it was canceled due to COVID. So I'm a little concerned about that too, because we planned on being at that last meeting that was canceled. Anyways, we are very concerned. We know that the rapid transit is coming down Wellington. I have a friend who's an engineer, and she's pretty much explaining to me that the city wants the property so that they can, the contractor can place their heavy equipment there. The project isn't supposed to start for 2 to 3 years, leaving us completely vulnerable for the next 2 to 3 years for no good reason. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and we'll have staff address some of your questions and concerns at the end. Are there any technical questions from the committee? Seeing none, and are there any other members of the public? Just making sure there's nobody else that would like to speak to this before I close the public participation meeting. I'm not seeing anybody jump up, so I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Kaibaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So just going to city staff, there were some concerns about security and fencing, lighting, and the fact that properties on Watson Street would then be exposed to Wellington. So I'm wondering if there are plans to, or if there is a way to have fencing installed once these buildings are removed. I know when there's construction that happens, generally there is fencing that's installed around the site of a construction site. So I'm wondering about that kind of thing, having fencing installed around these sites during and after demolition. And also, was there a community meeting in March that was with the date changed, or was it canceled outright?
This is Kyle Gonyu, and I will respond to the latter question that was asked through the chair. It seems like there might have been some confusion regarding the March meetings. The Latch was able to meet on its regularly scheduled March meeting on March 11th of 2020, and then the pandemic hit with the shutdown starting March 18th. So the public participation meeting for this demolition request was originally scheduled for March 30th of 2020, but was postponed until this afternoon. So there was a notice of the cancellation as well as the rescheduling that was mailed out to all of the property owners within 120 meters, as well as published on the city's website and in the Londoner.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Chair, I can't answer the first questions, but I can. What we will do is we will follow up with our partners in Realty Services and in the RT office and get a response so that we'll have an answer for you before council.
So when will we have that answer today, or do we have to wait until the council meeting for that answer, since the member of the public is here now?
Madam Chair, I don't see anybody on the list here from either Realty Services or the RT office, and I don't have that information. I'm not too sure if I'll be able to get anybody right now to see if I can get that information for you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. But I'm just wondering, like, if there anyone, if from development planning, do we have requirements for fencing around? I think we do when there's a demolition that takes place. There's a requirement for that construction fencing that goes up. So I wonder if anybody knows anything about those kinds of things for safety. What kind of fencing goes up, and would it stay up once the demolition is complete?
Through the chair, yeah, the first part, yes. I mean, as it would relate to any construction fencing or fencing that's required during the actual takedown of the property, then that would be done consistent with what the city policies are. I believe that the neighbor is more concerned as to what happens after it's done and whether or not there would be any permanent form of fencing or barrier between what would then be the vacant lot and their property. And that's a question I can't answer at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. So I just want to confirm about the meetings. So there is a committee, an advisory committee made up of volunteer citizens called the London Advisory Committee on Heritage. That's the LATCH. And they met on their regularly scheduled meeting on March 11th, and they discussed these heritage properties. And that's when they concurred with staff that these properties did not meet the criteria for heritage designation. So that meeting took place. A public participation meeting was scheduled to take place before the planning committee on March 30th, and that was postponed until today. And that's what we are doing today. Even though it was supposed to have taken place on March 30th, but because of COVID, it was postponed. So I'll go to committee. Do you have any questions or comments about this demolition application? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And I'm not sure who to go to with this question, but I understand what we're doing right now is taking these two properties with this recommendation off the register. So does that automatically mean that we are going to start the demolition? And if so, do we know when that's going to happen? I think I heard from the community that the concerns are more around the demolition. I'm not sure if that's a conversation to have right now, but I'd like to know a little bit more, understanding that we're just taking these two properties off the register right now, and what happens after that.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett or Mr. Gagnon?
To you, Madam Chair, again, what's before you tonight is the heritage issue. The demolition is going to follow up, and I was actually sending the emails out trying to see if I can get some answers on these questions. I apologize, neither Kyle nor I have the information on the timing of that larger project. What's in front of you this evening is the matter of removing the property from the registers so the demolition can occur. I'm trying to see if I can get some information as it relates to the actual timing of the demolition and what any plans might be for the fencing of the site once the properties have been demolished.
Right. So I'll attempt to explain it to the member of the public that's here. And if I say something wrong, Mr. Barrett or Mr. Gagnon, you can correct me. So these are two homes that are on the listing of possible heritage designation. And so what happens when somebody applies for a demolition permit, the matter of their heritage designation has to be considered first. So it sort of gives a pause button for properties that may possibly be properties with some heritage significance. And so before a demolition request can be granted, the matter of the heritage designation has to be heard first. So that's what we're doing here tonight. Deciding whether or not these two properties are worthy of heritage designation. We've heard from our heritage planner who says that these two properties do not meet the criteria of heritage designation. So what the committee is faced with tonight is removing these two properties from the listing of possible heritage properties, which will then open up the ability of the applicant to go ahead and make an application for a demolition of these properties. So hopefully that was correct and clear, and I'm sure I will be corrected probably by members of the committee who know. And are there any other comments or questions from the committee on this? Not seeing any. So the recommendation from, oh, Deputy Mayor Helmer, go ahead.
Recognizing I'm running the risk of potentially muddying the waters, I want to say I'm in support of the recommendation from staff in terms of the heritage value of the properties. I did want to say that we dealt with the matter of the demolition of these two properties at Corporate Services Committee and then later at Council in January. And so I haven't gone back to double check, but I believe at Council we approved the demolition of both of these properties. And there are two things happening. There's one, which is the rapid transit project, which, as the resident noted, is a couple years away. There's also a Watson Street sewer reconstruction project, which is much more imminent. And there's need to do some staging for that project on this property. And that's not 2 to 3 years away. That's happening very soon. So I think that is the potentially the confusion around the construction staging. And I do think, separate from planning committee, making sure that the city is a good neighbor and is providing appropriate buffering between these properties and the adjoining properties, I think is something we can perhaps deal with at a different committee. This one, in terms of the heritage issue, I support the recommendation from the staff.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That's a really good point. So when the sewage construction project is dealt with at a different committee is a good time for that committee to make sure city staff are putting in the appropriate buffers around the adjoining properties. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that point. Are there any other comments or questions on this? Okay, so the recommendation is that we remove these buildings from the Register of Cultural Heritage Resources, which would in effect remove them from the heritage listing, and they would no longer be considered for heritage designation. Can I have a mover? Please, thanks. Councillor Hopkins. Can I have a second? Seconded by? Oh, thank you. Seconded by the mayor. I will call the question. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. That takes us to item 3.3, a public participation meeting for an application at 1339 to 1347 Commissioners Road West. Can I have a mover to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga. You're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and so I'll go to Mr. Maitland or Mr. Barrett for a brief introduction of this.
It's Life Maitland here. So what we have in front of us is a site plan proposal for 1339 through 1347 Commissioners Road West. The development proposed is the implementation of a bonus zone and will result in a 5-story apartment building with 34 units. With the exception of 2 parking spaces, all the parking spaces are provided underground. We only have 2 comments left to be addressed from staff, significant comments, following 3 submissions from the applicant. They're the implementation of the affordable housing, which requires a secondary agreement to secure the 3 affordable units being provided under the bonus zone. The second comment is with regard to the elevations and ensuring that the glazing matches with the elevations that were presented through the bonus zone. We have had a secondary conversation offline on that with the applicant, and we've come to an agreement and understand that the locations where the elevations have been changed from what was provided at the bonus zone have been changed to hide structural and functional elements. So beams and piping, that type of thing. So we're okay with the elevations as they are currently presented. I'll point council to the resolution, or I'll speak to the resolution that came through at the bonus zone, some of the requirements there, all of which have been addressed in our opinion. So when the rezoning came through and the H5 was applied, we were advised to look at a photometric analysis to manage lighting impacts, noise study to evaluate and mitigate noise impacts, specifically related to the parking ramp and underground parking garage, look at enhanced provision of boundary landscaping, protection and preservation of trees along the northerly boundary and the shared boundaries, and provide trees other than invasive or hazard trees, and to use privacy trees for replacement trees. All these comments have been addressed at this point. I'd like to finish just by commenting or providing a response to the one commenting letter that you see on your agenda from Edith Hopkins at 1337 Commissioners Road West, who's writing on behalf of the condo corporation at that location. Edith and I went back and forth a couple times. There were some other concerns, but nice to see these narrowed down. So with regards to this kind of three concerns that she has maintained, the first is with regards to the adjacency of the driveway. Just given the design challenge of the site, the driveway was ultimately going to be paired either with their driveway at 1337 or with the driveway at 1349 on the other side. Transportation was reviewed and they don't see a significant level of conflict to warrant changing it. The second portion is, the second comment they make is that there's a lack of external parking area for visitors, deliveries, and moving vans. Would just note that there's 2 parking spaces above ground in addition to a lay-by. And the third comment is with regards to the exterior lighting. When we review those lighting plans for a site plan, what we look for is light trespass onto adjacent properties. And the photometric plans provided show no light trespass. If there was some concern from the applicant about providing some address to this comment with reduced lighting, that is something that could be discussed, but as it stands, their lighting plan does show no light trespass and meets the city standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maitland. Is the applicant in the committee room?
Yes, we have the applicant here.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Harry Frusios with Zelenka Priamo. It's nice to see Planning Committee back up and running again, albeit under some very unique circumstances. I don't have much to add tonight. Actually, I just want to thank staff for obviously their efforts in processing this application and bringing a recommendation forward this evening. And I also want to thank the members of the condominium board for 1337 Commissioners Road and thank them for their comments and acknowledging that we have addressed the majority of their comments. As you just heard from Mr. Maitland, there really is only one item left, and that is the agreement for the affordable housing. That's something we will undertake subsequent to this meeting. I had prepared a slide presentation just really for the benefit of those who may not have seen the site plan. I understand it's in your package this evening, so what I'll do is I'll leave it to your discretion if you want to hear a brief presentation, or just so I can answer any questions you might have specific to the site plan. Otherwise, Madam Chair, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there members of the public in the committee room that would like to speak to this? Is that guy? I see someone standing. Ms. Bunn, is that somebody who would like to speak to this application?
This gentleman's for another item.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any members of the public. I'll look to committee if you would like to hear Mr. Frusio's presentation, or if you have any questions for the applicant. I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand, so thank you, Mr. Fusio. I don't think we need the presentation today. Since we have no members of the public, I need a motion to close the PPM. Are you moving that, Deputy Mayor? Yep, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I know that this is in Councillor Hopkins' ward. I wonder if you have any comments on this.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a comment, but before I do have a follow-up question. As you know, this is bonusing because of design and affordable housing. The intensification here is quite a bit. And I'm glad to hear that the agreement is almost in place for affordable housing. I know that's something that we're not involved in, and I just think it's really important as we're approving a site plan here that that agreement is in place. So I appreciate the applicant saying that it's just about to happen. I understand the panels, the elevations are going back to the original design. Again, that urban design element that we're giving the applicant for the bonusing is really important, and really thank the applicant for this unique design. The other question I had, that reading the report that was a little bit outstanding, was the bicycle parking. Has that been agreed to? It was sort of missing there. Just a quick question through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Yeah, but back through the chair. Yeah, what was missing there is the details on the bicycle parking. So that with a development of this nature, what we're looking for is internal bicycle parking at a rate of 0.75 per unit. They provided the bicycle parking room. They just haven't provided a detail on the plan showing how those lockups are going to be structured. So I'm anticipating that's going to appear on the next and final site plan, and we'll be able to wrap up at that point, provided there's no other comments you feel we need to address.
No, thank you for mentioning that. I'm just making sure it hasn't been forgotten. This is an intense area, lots of movement parts to this location with the school and the other buildings around it. It's a busy area, and as we intensify, it's important that we provide other modes of transportation. So I'm glad that the applicant is going to be doing this as well. I just want to say my comments now. I'm sure you've all read the comments written by Edith Hopkins, who is not related to me, by the way, but representing the community. And I do think the community has thanked the applicant when it has come to relocating the waste pickup. That was a big concern, and the opportunity to put trees to the north and the east of this property. The applicant is putting in a number of privacy trees, going 10 meters instead of 12 meters. So the community acknowledges that and thanks the applicant. Also, the applicant did a noise and lighting study, and it shows that it meets the city standards. So that is important, even though there are a few concerns that still remain. And I just want to stick with the lighting part. So at the back of the building, we have these two large poles that are up 15 feet high. And even though we're going to have that privacy group of trees to the north, it's going to take years for that to go up. And I know the community is expressing some concerns. There's not a lot of space here, that the luminous that's coming down from these 5,000 watts is going to create a lot of lighting in the back, and just wondering why it has to go that high. And just again, reminding the committee, it's going to take years for these trees to come up and kind of create that bit of privacy. So that's still a concern. And as mentioned, the adjoining driveways and that barrier and how that is going to be defined. I know transportation has done a study. the volumes, the numbers aren't that great, so it's not a concern. But again, it still doesn't address people moving and coming and going with these adjoined driveways. So the community is still concerned there. I think it's really important to give thanks to the applicant for working with staff, and also to thank the community as well. This is going to really change their area. And I know construction is going to be intense in this infill site. And I'm not sure where we are when it comes to construction, if we know when it's going to start at all. Maybe that's a question if I can ask again in my comments through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, to Mr. Maitland.
Sorry, is the question, let me just ask for clarification on the question with regards to timing.
Just generally, I know the community is preparing to have to deal with this construction, and I'm not being specific to the timing, but what can the community expect when it comes to the noise bylaw and the disruption that will inevitably take place?
I don't believe, Mike, seeing Mr. Pease is available, I'll let him answer that. He might be in a bit of a better position to answer that.
Certainly, thank you. And through you to the chair, the question I'm hearing is related to construction start date, and I think seems like we're going to be playing. I'm going to pass it along, but that might be a good question for Mr. Fruzios to answer on behalf of his client. With respect to some of the other comments that were made in terms of photometrics and the driveway location, the photometrics themselves, as Mr. Maitland indicated, show no infiltration onto the neighboring property. If there is a request for staff and the approval authority to take another look at that with the applicant, that could be part of the resolution. The shared or the driveway located on and where it's located on the property, that's more of a product of the bonus zone. This is a bonus zone that locks in the site plan, the elevations that were presented at the time of the rezoning. So really at this stage, it becomes a little bit more challenging to reconsider the location of the driveway. But with respect, by and large, to everything else in terms of the construction time and the date that it will be commencing, then I may pass that to Mr. Fruzios.
Okay, I'll go to you, Mr. Fruzios, if you have a response for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, our client is anxious to get going actually on this project. And once we've managed to get through the site plan approval stage, you still have to go back to council to get the holding provision removed. And I hope that that will happen over the next, within the next meeting or so. But he will be applying for a permit now that we know that the site plan is pretty much complete. He can apply for his permit, then he will begin construction fairly shortly after that.
Thank you. Okay, that's good, Councillor? Yeah.
If I may
go ahead.
follow up on a couple things that were just mentioned here, and getting back to the two driveways, I understand it's really how do you put a barrier in between these two driveways, and I think that is more the concern. I don't think the community is asking for the driveway to be moved over or anything like that. It's just you're going to have driveways side by side. You're coming off a very, very busy arterial road, and just sometimes may not turn as fast as you should, and how is that barrier, or is there going to be a barrier? I just think it's important, heard from the community. I wonder if I could also, I appreciate staff's response about the lighting and maybe having another look at that lighting part with those two poles. I would ask as we go forward to just to make a note of, to relook at the wattage and the lighting that is going to quite prominent. This condominium complex backs on to the back of the building, which has the underground parking and these lights that will allow to have these cars go in and down and see. But again, how strong the wattage is, I would appreciate it in the recommendation that it would be just looked at as one last look. And other than that, we'll be supporting this recommendation.
Okay, so Mr. Maitland, is there any kind of barrier that is planned to be between the two driveways, which will be directly adjacent to each other?
Yeah, so there is one street tree to be located between the two driveways. As well, the radius of them is as much as as the two driveways are adjacent, they're not overlapping, so they are distinct, and there's a street tree located in between the two. Just one other final comment with regards to the photometrics. If it is a significant concern, feel free to provide that recommendation to us, and we can go back to the applicant. There may be something else, but I'm not a photometrics expert, and I'm not sure what other options the applicant has available to them. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maitland. So we could add that in the recommendation, it being noted that that this issue was raised or something like that. So I'll look, the clerks will be busy with that, and I'll go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about, I think it's probably best to describe it as the northern boundary of the site, but it's sort of the northeasterly boundary, I guess. What the vegetation is that's planned along the site plan there. It's shown as all the same kind of vegetation, but I just want to understand what exactly is planned to be planted along that boundary.
Do you have that, Mr. Maitland?
If I may, I'll pass it over to our landscape architect, Lisa McNiven, if she's available to answer that. Specifics to what's in the northeast corner, you said?
That whole boundary, it looks like it's the same planting.
Okay.
Yeah, hello, through the chair, this is Lisa. The whole strip along there is alternating white spruce and white pine. And when they're going in, they're going to be about 2 meters tall. So they're just going to be planted from a ball. They're not going to be spaded in or anything like that. There's not sufficient room for that.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I wanted to ask about it because I know that in previous discussions, this was an important transition between the proposed development and the existing residential. I don't know that we need to put it in as a direction to site plan, but some kind of temporary shielding of the light while the trees are perhaps growing in. I've seen that done in other site plans where they'll have some kind of shield off the side of the light that just blocks it. And then they can take that down once the trees have grown in. And if that's going to be an issue, I think that's the kind of thing that might go a long way in terms of minimizing any kind of light intrusion that would otherwise be prevented by the trees once they're fully grown in. I'm glad to see that there's so many that are being planted along there. I think once that's grown in, it's going to be a good buffer.
If I may, through the chair for a moment.
Go ahead.
We do require, actually following the changes for bird-friendly guidelines in November, full cutoff and zero up light is a requirement, and that's part of why we're seeing zero light trespass. But if, like I said, if there's something additional, we can definitely look at that if that's the direction that comes out of the committee.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this application? Okay. I just want to point out that this was a concerning application. I remember when this came, and it was concerning to the adjacent property with the condominium owners. And I want to note in their letter that's on the added agenda, they wish to convey, and this is from Ms. Hopkins, who I happened to meet with her and her neighbors. She wants to convey the thanks of the condominium corporation to planning staff, to city council, and to the developer for listening to their concerns. She says that they feel strongly that constructive partnerships between the city, the community, and developers are crucial for London to build a caring community that's welcoming and at the same time economically strong. And they look forward to an amicable partnership with their new neighbors and welcoming them to their new home. So that's a lovely letter to receive at the end of a planning application. And as you know, these infill applications can sometimes cause distress to existing neighborhoods. And so it's lovely to get that kind of feedback. I did want to point out as well in Mr. Frusio's presentation that's added to that's on the added agenda, that they do note that there will be a total of 28 secured bicycle spaces provided in the underground parking structure. So Mr. Maitland pointed out that they haven't seen the details of that yet, but he has pointed that out in his presentation. So with that, I'll ask one more time if there are any questions or comments on this application. Counselor Hopkins, I was going to get the clerk to read what she had added, or do you want to speak first, or?
No, I was just going to ask if she could read.
Yep, so I will get that now.
So the two that are added are a review of the lighting on the proposed building and any potential impacts on the neighboring condominium development. Part B, temporary shielding of the lighting that blocks, temporary shielding of the lights that blocks the light while the trees are growing.
She's going to pretty it up, but that's the gist. Is that okay?
If I may, Madam Chair, just I really do appreciate it. I know it is a concern with the community. I've been there. These bedrooms are pretty close to the lighting and to the driveway. It's something that is going to really affect the condominium owners to the north, and I really hope I can get committee support on this, just to look at a different way to do this. I understand the community has become experts when it comes to luminous lighting, and they have a great technical knowledge of what other opportunities are out there. So I appreciate the committee's support on allowing us to go back and see if there's a different way we can deal with the lighting. Right now, those trees, it's going to take a while to get 15 feet to protect the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the vote. I need a mover and a seconder first. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Holder. Now I will call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That brings us to item 3.4, a public participation meeting. It's another public site plan meeting for 536 to 542 Windermere Road. Can I get a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer, and I'll call the vote on that. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I believe this is Mr. Maitland again, if you would like to give us a brief presentation or intro.
Sure. What you have in front of you is another site plan public meeting. This is for 536 through 542 Windermere Ave. The proposal is for a 12-unit cluster townhouse complex. So it's 2 buildings of back-to-back townhouse units. So there'll be 6 units in each building, 3 facing Windermere Road, 6 facing an internal walkway, and 3 facing the rear laneway. The buildings themselves are 10.5 meters tall and 3.0 meters from the western property limit, 2.1 meters from the front yard. All of these limits were established through a rezoning process in 2019. At the end of that process, there was one neighbor who chose to appeal it to the LPAT, and that appeal was ultimately withdrawn following negotiations around the landscaping along that northern property line. And so the landscaping that's shown in that location was something that the neighbor who had made the appeal requested, and it's something that we have reviewed at the city and are okay with. As of the writing of this report, there had been 2 submissions. There have been subsequent conversations, but we've yet to receive an official 3rd submission that addresses the comments here, although the interim submissions that we've received from the applicant have shown some progress on some of the outstanding comments. With regards to the outstanding comments from the city perspective, what we were looking at most concerning or most significantly was the provision of amenity space for the units. So given the plan that's in front of you, the amenity spaces are sunken over 1 meter, and this is in contravention of the site plan controlled bylaw standards. Also, the elevations, particularly on the east side, adjacent to the parking lot, didn't show any articulation or openings for windows, and so that was a notable concern. The photometric plan here does a good job of not showing light trespass onto the neighbors. However, in that walkway in between the 2 buildings, we were looking for an approach that provides a bit more lighting there, just for the function of the site as it is. In order to improve the quality of the amenity spaces in that central walkway, we're looking for some sort of design, or either in terms of screening or in terms of other elements that remove the impacts of the parking onto that. And so we've requested that as well. There were only 2 outstanding engineering comments of any significance. The first is with regards to ponding, so just in terms of potential stormwater impacts. And the second was with regards to the arrangement of servicing, so water and sanitary conflicting alignments. But those 2, we understand, are being dealt with at this time, or they're looking to address them. There are a number of comments that have been received in addition to the comments that are in the report and on the agenda. I've also received 2 more emails. However, I would note that all of the comments received to date have addressed the same themes. And so the requests that we've seen, the first kind of central theme is just a continued opposition to the development in its entirety in terms of intensification of the site. The second request that we're seeing consistently from those who've chosen to comment is for an 8-foot fence, so a 2.4 meter fence around the entirety of the entire perimeter of the property. I would note that under our fencing bylaw, we're limited to 2.1 meters, and that's 7 feet. And so that is the maximum height that we'd be looking at. The last comment that I have seen from a couple of commenters is with regards to the landscaping along the eastern property limit. And so if you look at this development kind of holistically, you'll note that almost all of the built form is very much concentrated to the west end of the development. And that's because there's a significant easement along the east side of the property. And so that is to account for the city's regional water supply line that runs underneath it. And for that reason, what can be placed in that easement is quite limited. So the eastern edge of the parking lot, that is as close as they're allowed to pave under the conditions of the easement. And then from that edge of the parking lot to the fence, the desire is, in order to maintain access in case of emergencies for that main water line, is that any landscaping there is quite minimal. So although we're getting comments that are requesting significant treatments, trees, significant shrubbery like that, for example, as you'd see on the western limit of the property with the cedar hedges, there are limits given the easement in terms of what we can accommodate. I think that's a general overview. If there's further questions, I can answer those as they come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maitland. Is the applicant here?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Campbell from Zelenka Priamo here on behalf of the applicant. First of all, thanks for having this meeting this way. I know some of us may be a little bit anxious about going out in public, and as you can see, there's no one else in the room. So this is a bit of a departure from the last time this application came to a Planning and Environment Committee. So it's nice to see those public comments that people are still participating in the process. Thanks to Mr. Maitland for providing his comments. There's a couple of items I just want to provide some additional information on. First of all, the amenity space. We have revised the drawing, so there is no more lowered or sunken amenity space. The amenity space is now at grade. In lieu of the sunken amenity space, we're just going to have window wells for the, like standard window wells for the lower floor of the building. That's going to allow that space to function a little bit better and allow a little bit more space and allow that landscaping to breathe a little bit more. The second point was the windows on the easterly elevation. We've provided plans to staff in advance of a complete third submission that do show a number of windows on the east elevation. And we were just in contact with staff earlier today, and we'll be revising those elevations a little bit more to hopefully provide a little bit more fenestration on that elevation. There was the comment about adding additional trees. Unfortunately, given the easement, that's not possible at this time. Although, you know, we wish it was the case that we could add some more trees in there, but unfortunately, the reality is that trees and water mains don't really mix. There is the outstanding engineering concerns and issues, and our engineer is working with city engineering staff in order to come to a conclusion on that. We think we're very close to reaching an agreement. The servicing issue has been resolved, and we have those engineering plans now. So we're very thankful to staff. Staff has been excellent in moving this project forward, and we're hoping that we can get in the ground soon and get this project done by spring of next year. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Are there any members of the public here for this application? It looks like you're the only one in that room, but so I'm not seeing anyone in committee room 1 or 2, 1 and 2. Oh, there you go, Ms. Bunn.
There aren't any other people in committee room 1 and 2.
Thank you very much. So I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the mayor, and I'll call that vote. Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. Are there any comments, questions from the committee? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wonder if, through the chair, our staff wanted to comment on the eastern boundary. Many of the letters from the neighbors are talking about the differences in terms of the landscaping that's planned. As we recall from previous discussions, and it's indicated on the site plan, there's an easement that runs along that part of the property, and I wonder how that's impacting the potential for landscaping along the eastern boundary.
Mr. Maitland.
Thank you. Through the chair, what I've been informed with regards to the easement conversations in terms of what we would permit is anything that's either existing, and anything new would have to be soft, low landscaping. So grasses, basically sod perennials, that type of thing. They're quite concerned about roots, and trees were very much a no. That's the understanding in terms of my understanding what our water department would be willing to permit at that location, because they need to access it. This being, like I said, the main trunk line into the city.
Deputy Mayor?
That's it for me. I just think it's important to explain why the rendering looks so different in terms of the site plan, and why certain things that might make a lot of sense intuitively may not be possible.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I have a quick question again about that eastern landscaping. So right now there are quite a few trees on the site. Will there be trees removed at the eastern end of the site?
I'm going to take this opportunity to pass it on to again, our landscape architect, Lisa McNiven. My understanding is that there are some trees to be maintained, but she'll understand that plan or be able to explain that plan better than I will.
Just bear with me 1 second. I'm having a technical problem. Oh, I love the modern age. No, they're not showing those trees coming out in their tree preservation plan. In fact, they're putting protective fencing around them so that they won't be disturbed during the construction of the driveway and the parking lot. So no, there's some conifers in there and such that are not coming out.
Thank you. I have another question about the upgrades to the Arve pumping station. Will anything that's happening there have any effect at all on this property?
There was a time where that was my file back when I was over in city planning, but I think that's a question for Mr. Barrett at this point.
Do you know, Mr. Barrett, or I can also ask this question at council when there's a bigger group of people?
Sorry, that question wouldn't come to me on the grading.
Okay, I'll wait and ask it at the council meeting. Any other questions from committee? So can I pass the chair to you, Councillor Turner, and make a few comments?
Certainly. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. So I'm glad to see some of the things that have come back from site plan and the detail and the diligence that staff have shown with this file. Again, infill projects are often controversial and often contentious in a neighborhood that's been, especially one that's been around for a long time. So there was particular concern from the neighborhood with those outdoor amenity spaces. I'm happy to see those having been addressed. I know the community was quite upset that many aspects of this application didn't seem to jibe with our site plan bylaw. And so I'm hopeful that the community sees the care and concern that staff have taken to ensure that this adheres to our site plan control bylaw. I'm wondering with some of the changes and concerns that have been listed, and there are quite a few of them, if there are any concerns from staff that, having gone through a very public meeting in allowing the rezoning to take place, if any of the changes are substantial enough that they might affect what was passed, because, for example, those outdoor amenity spaces and how they were situated below grade, things like that. I'm wondering if this is still adheres closely enough to what was passed at council, seeing these changes coming through the site plan process.
Sure, I think there's one kind of important distinction here, is that what was provided through the rezoning was a conceptual site plan, and it was noted by some members, and I think you've kind of hinted at it in your comment, that we commented at that time that there are certain ways they were showing it that may not have been entirely implementable through site plan. And so although the base structure of it in terms of two buildings of 6 units facing each other is still maintained, there have been some changes, and to kind of address those comments, I would say that although, and Mr. Campbell spoke to it, although they have provided us a drawing showing the removal of those sunken amenity spaces, that did come in within the last day. So it's not yet officially been submitted, but as you pointed out, there has been some response to address these concerns that we've had through the process.
Thank you very much. And I want to say thank you to the applicant for, I know that there has been some work that's gone on between members of the community directly with the applicant over these intervening months. And so thank you to the applicants for having those conversations with the community. And I really want to thank staff for listening to the community and also, you know, acting the way that we know that staff take their jobs very seriously and conduct their work very professionally. Community members sometimes are very defensive and very afraid when these kinds of applications come through. And there's a lot of emotion when these things come to the planning committee. Staff have to sift through all of this, and especially Mr. Maitland. I know, Mr. Maitland, you've been involved from the beginning on this file, and Melissa Campbell as well worked very hard on this file, and often staff don't get a lot of thanks when these applications come forward. So I'm saying thank you very much for dealing with this file very sensitively, I would say, and addressing all of the concerns, especially that came up that are site plan issues. So with that, I'll take the chair back and look for a motion to accept the staff recommendation. So I have the chair back. Thanks, Councillor Turner. Moved by the mayor and seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Check one more time to see if anybody else has any comments. No. So I'll call the vote. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'm looking at the agenda. There are no items for direction. There are no deferred matters or additional business unless that someone on the committee has additional business, and I see none. So I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kaibaga, and I'll call the question and we can do a hand vote. All those in favor? I see a unanimous vote. Thank you, committee. It's Monday. We got another one in 2 days, so I'll see you. Okay, I can't shut that off.